Between the time when Universal made the crap Blu-ray HD master and his Panasonic UB820 endlessly malfunctioned, there was a restoration undreamed of. And unto this, the Crusader, destined to bear the non-existent crown of film preservation upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high film restoration. This is good, but what is best in life?
The original audio mix thrown away. Bad 5.1 remix. Film grain out of your transfer, and the color timing in hell.
Wrong! Crusader, what is best in life? To crush your video enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their studios.
Hello and welcome back to this damn fully realistic crusade. In this video, I will be reviewing the wonderful new release from Arrow Video, the Conan Chronicles, bringing together the two official Conan films from Dino De Laurentiis Productions. Of course, 1982's iconic Conan the Barbarian, directed by John Milius, and of course the much derided, lesser-regarded sequel, Conan the Destroyer, from 1984, directed by Richard Fleischer. This set, unfortunately, does not include the sort of third film that, while it's not a Conan film, it shares a lot of the same personnel and is sort of a third film, as it was a spin-off, and that was 1995's Red Sonja. That is handled by Studio Canal, who unfortunately released a UHD in Europe of a heavily revisionist 4K master with atrociously bad color grading, so hopefully Arrow or someone else can do similar efforts with Red Sonja as Arrow has done here with the first two Conan films. This is a set and release for both films that has been long overdue. These films have been treated quite abysmally on home video in the past by Universal. In particular, the Blu-ray releases were so atrocious that I didn't think they really reflected the films at all. They had sound remixes, horrible digital noise reduction in terms of grain removal. The color timing was not all that great, and they just looked and sounded terrible. In fact, they were so bad that I refused to actually upgrade to them, and so I have just been rewatching the old DVDs for both films for a number of years now. Those Universal Blu-rays are quite atrocious, and there has long been discussion in the home video enthusiast community, not to mention fans of the films, that these needed to be treated properly, and now Arrow Video has come in and done the work themselves that Universal didn't do the first time round, and produced this beautiful set, finally respecting the films as they should properly be, and also giving us not only brand new 4K scans and 4K presentations with Dolby Vision HDR, but also the original mono mixes for both films and an absolute plethora of new supplemental features plus legacy extras. To talk a little bit about Conan the Barbarian itself, not only was this film on its release in 1982 quite a notable success at the box office, it is the film that in a lot of ways really solidified the fantasy trend of the 1980s, and I think without question remains not only the most intelligent, but also the best of the 1980s fantasy films, or sword and sorcery films. The main issue most fans of Robert E. Howard's original Conan creation from Weird Tales magazine and the pulp era, for the most part, have with this film is that it's not technically Howard's Conan in terms of the literary character. What the film does is essentially give us an origin story and a particular take on Howard's incredible, iconic character. And interestingly, if you study the genesis of this film and how it actually started as an Oliver Stone screenplay, which, as Stone admitted, was written entirely with the power of cocaine, and certainly reads that way, and it's a must-read if you're interested in script drafts and film developments. Basically, what John Milius did when he was brought on was to sort of basically corral the, shall we say, the cocaine in the massive script that probably would have necessitated at least a 3, if not 4 hour long film, and a insane budget and effects that were not achievable at the time, really, at least feasibly on a decent budget. Basically, he corralled all the crazy ideas and took the core elements of Stone's initial story structure, which was derived from several Howard tales, and fused it with a greater sense of the history of the past. So you see many recognizable elements of other cultures if you have a background in historical studies, but also Milius infused the film with a definite sense of films that he loved, whether it be westerns or especially the films of Akira Kurosawa. There's a great deal of Seven Samurai and other Kurosawa classics, among other allusions and references Milius was making in the final film. But essentially, what Milius did when he was brought on was to take the best ideas from the massive, frankly, rather unworkable Stone script and put his own spin on it and also focus the narrative. So we were much more directly following the origin of Conan the Barbarian and his journey from boy who sees his entire family and village and thus people killed by the evil Thulsa Doom. But basically we are focused entirely on his journey from basically orphaned child and through all the trials and tribulations to become the battle-hardened barbarian. Essentially the first film here is an origin story to get us to what was supposed to be a series of films. And unfortunately, Milius was basically constantly at odds with Dino De Laurentiis and was not asked back for the sequel. And that is when the series, in terms of creativity and intelligence and spirit and frankly also philosophical ideas, everything that makes the first film special, that goes away. And that is why everybody has that knee-jerk reaction when you come to these films and you see the first and only sequel, and then you basically wonder what happened. But it's interesting to note that the critical response in 1982 wasn't necessarily always picking up on the interesting bits of philosophy that Milius was working with and the ideas that he was bringing to the fore. Some of this, I think, was due to the fact that the U.S. theatrical cut was edited down in certain areas, and that seems to have really affected the overall tone in certain areas and made the film feel less weighty. That's one of Milius's great strengths when the material's really working. You have that sense of weightiness, and so there are moments in this film where you have especially the great Milius monologues that Max von Sydow or James Earl Jones is saying, and basically any actor would give their entire salary to have one speech like that. So when the moments are big in Conan the Barbarian, they are bigger than life, as they should be. And what's fascinating is how, in spite of the film Conan giving us an origin story, which Howard never did, and giving us not only that origin, but a direct beat-for-beat explanation of who Conan is, which, again, Howard never did, and the mystery of Conan and the fact that the original stories tell different aspects of Conan's life out of chronological order. It's just basically different tales and different adventures Conan winds up in at different stages in his life. It makes the character feel more mythical, and the fact that he's not fully defined makes the character more interesting. Well, the film version has to define everything because it's basically an origin story. But in spite of all of that, and in spite of all of the very non-Conan things that happen in the film version of Conan the Barbarian, what Milius does is actually replicate a lot of Robert E. Howard's tone. He also borrows a little bit in terms of names and things from some of the other Howard characters in the so-called sort of shared Robert E. Howard universe. But the film remains an absolutely remarkable blending and sort of amalgamation of Robert E. Howard's iconic pulp stories of Conan, all the influences that were there on Milius, the ideas from Oliver Stone's script that he also was pulling things from Howard, also pulling things from The Power of Cocaine. Again, when you read Stone's script, and it is online, I will link to it so you can experience that for yourself, you feel the cocaine. So I'm not just saying that as a joke. I mean, you really do feel it. But again, Milius had to basically go in and laser focus on the good parts and string them together and bring everything to a more focused narrative that would work in the context of a film. So again, the film is incredibly effective, even though it's technically not doing Howard's Conan. The overall cast is sensational for these parts who are, in terms of the characters, are themselves sort of amalgamations of different types of the characters characters in Howard stories. So while you can point to certain elements that are directly referencing a Howard story, there are other elements that kind of borrow from different ones and put a little spin on it. Or even if it's the same character, or especially Conan himself, it's the same but different, if that makes sense. So really the remarkable feat of Conan the Barbarian, the first film, is the fact that John Milius was able to pull all of this off. It has a feeling of also it being an old-fashioned adventure film, and also filled with a lot of the core themes you see in Milius's other films. It's very easy to make many direct connections with, say, The Wind and the Lion, which is one of Milius's best films, and is playing around with some similar elements, and you can very much see a direct through line from that film in 1975 going to Conan the Barbarian in 1982, and how Milius was basically working in the themes that he loved to mine, and getting to use his incredible interest in history and make direct historical connotations, even down to having some of the armor and production design referencing past cultures. This is something that you see somewhat in Howard's stories, so at least it's another element of Robert E. Howard's writing that I think does turn up in the film. But this leads me to another of the truly important names behind the first film, which I really think there are at least three, but the second is the production design of Ron Cobb, which is absolutely staggering in terms of the complexity of every single aspect of the production design, of building another world and trying to bring what Robert E. Howard put on the page to life, but in its own particular universe, and also the fact that this was done at De Laurentiis' studios and also primarily shooting on location in Spain, but they didn't have the greatest budget in the world either. So there's also something to the fact that this isn't a extraordinarily large budget film, that it makes it feel a little bit rough around the edges, which is such a part of its charm. And of course, this is all being done reel for reel, and the effects being used are old school practical effects that are incredibly well done. And so you have a film that now plays just as much like a fantasy fable as it did in 1982. The fact that everything is reel for reel, and there's this incredible production design with certain elements that are recognizable from actual human history as well, it makes it feel like a true experience. And then this is capped off by the third of the big three names, I think. Without question, the third is Basil Poledouris, who creates one of the all-time great film scores. It simply is. Poledouris' score for Conan the Barbarian, just the theme in and of itself makes the hairs stand up on the back of your neck every time you even think of it. In fact, when I read Howard's Conan, even though it is completely different to the film Conan, whenever you get to an epic moment in Howard's text, it's practically impossible to not hear Basil Poledouris' iconic Conan theme running through your head. It is bigger than life, and in fact, it is Polydorus' score that in a lot of places actually carries the film along with the visuals. There are certain sections of the film that are very light on dialogue, and this, I think, gets to the idea that I mentioned earlier about how there's quite a philosophical edge to this film. There's quite a philosophical edge to practically all of Milius's films, depending on how much control he had over them. And that's why I think the extended versions, the full version of the film really, although there were still censor edits and other cuts that Milius was not able to fight back against, but the fullest cut that is available on video releases is really the true version of the film. And the small edits that were made, while they seem small, actually serve to limit the effects of the philosophical edge that I think you get here. And it's fascinating to note how much of this film actually doesn't have dialogue. In places, it does start to resemble a really expertly mounted and beautiful silent film. Some of this, I think, might be, though, to sort of compensate for what I do think is in some ways a shortcoming, but in other ways part of the film's charm as well. And that is Arnold Schwarzenegger's lead performance as Conan. Physically, he looks incredible and fits the part perfectly, but this is also much earlier in his film career, so he wasn't as developed as an actor. And I do think he is underrated as an actor, and really always has been, in terms of he has a greater range than people give him credit for. But this was very early on for him, so I think Milius in particular wanted to make sure that he felt comfortable with the amount of dialogue he had, and also trying not to give him really big long speeches either. So it works beautifully within the context of the film, but you have to keep in mind this is the film version of Conan. And as much as I love and adore this film and think it is a great film, it's not Robert E. Howard's Conan. So that's the issue that all fans of Robert E. Howard always argue and grumble about, and some can't stand the film and some love the film like I do, but with reservations. It is a completely different thing. But again, the really fascinating aspect of this film is how Milius and the entire company was able to sort of fuse all these different elements together and get the spirit of Robert E. Howard's text, in spite of doing an origin story for a character that should never have an origin story. But it is a film that is a true experience. It is bigger than life in all the best senses of that term. It's certainly the kind of film that nobody's ever going to get to make ever again, because it's a film that takes risks. It's a film that isn't afraid to get dirty and gritty and raise real philosophical ideas. It's a film that actually makes you think, even though it's got plenty of beheadings. But while all the critics would focus on the violence, the actual violence is not unmotivated. All of it has dramatic weight, and this again is a key important part about Howard's original stories. While Conan will always have quite a significant body count, it's not without reason, and it's also deeply rooted in actual human history. If you look at the actual connotations between the various struggles between different factions and groups, it's pretty much all rooted in the history of the world, or at least echoing it. And that's what makes Howard stories and Conan the Barbarian, the film, all the more striking, and what makes it truly resonate. Because while most people might look at this as just a fantasy, it's so deeply rooted in human culture, it makes the audience start to question, just how much of this is buried within ourselves. And again, this is a film of great intellectual, deep thought, and it doesn't often get the credit for it. And that's what really bowled me over the first time I saw it, because this film was my introduction to the character. And I think for a good number of people, although it came out after the sort of resurgence of the character in the paperback reprints with the amazing Frank Frazetta artwork, and of course the iconic Marvel Comics version of the character, which was, I think, a bit closer to the original Robert E. Howard iteration, but also a bit more on the fantastic side, and couldn't do some of the exact things that Howard did in his pulp stories. So I think the Marvel Comics version in the 70s being so popular sort of set the stage for the film version of Conan being in areas wildly different from Howard's original creation. But this is such a striking film that I think it will make anybody a fan of the character and also want to go seek out Howard's original stories, which you should, because they are unparalleled in their genre. And basically, he was the father of what is now termed sword and sorcery, or that aspect of fantasy fiction. And those stories remain timeless. And while I do think the film does not quite match up to those, I think as a film, as an experience, it remains just an unbelievably impressive piece of work that is its own unique experience that manages to transcend its production values and the fact that it was stuck with just a mono mix because De Laurentiis didn't want to spring for a Dolby stereo mix for a film that features one of the greatest scores in film history, which is still a crying shame. It has such an energetic charge to it. It has such a sense of boyish glee in places that I think only Milius could get to in his best films. But but also such a sense of dramatic weight, and it uses the structure of an origin story to also really hone in on the fact that it's trying to present this as a fable, as something that is being told, which is why we have the bookends with the incredible iconic voice of Mako actually reciting, so as if this was just one of the stories of Conan, as you would have read in Robert E. Howard's text. So again, it is picking up on that from Howard as well, and with the idea that it was supposed to be part of a continuing series, or at least maybe 2 or 3 films, which unfortunately did not happen. And I think that is one of the great crying shames of series in films, in that we never got another John Milius Conan film, because I think they really achieved some kind of magic in this film. That is why it's so iconic. That's why it stood the test of time, and that is why it has so unbelievably deserved a proper restoration and treatment in the video realm, because in the past, while it at least got a decent DVD, that was not all that great and definitely needed an upgrade, and Universal's first go-round with an HD master is just an appallingly terrible Blu-ray that disrespects such an incredible piece of work that is a work of art. Again, Conan the Barbarian's had a bit of a convoluted history on home video. First of all, you have to deal with the multiple cuts of the film. The US theatrical cut was 127 minutes, and that was released on all early Universal releases, including the letterbox Laserdisc, which still is important for reasons that I'll get to. Then we had the 129-minute international cut with the, I think, really crucial additional pieces of material, especially some additional shots and the ending sequence, which their removal for the US theatrical cut, I think, greatly diminishes the power and impact of the ending, and really harms the overall thematic impact of the film. And I think had that little bit of material been left in for the US theatrical release, I do think it would have at least helped the critical reputation a little bit. And when I first started looking at the different versions, I simply couldn't believe that that material was ever removed. It's so small in terms of the amount of runtime, but I think it is truly crucial. Then for the DVD release, John Milius requested a deleted scene of a conversation between Conan and his pal Subutai was restored before the battle sequence. This is actually quite a nice scene, and I think Schwarzenegger is quite effective here. It's one of his best moments in terms of performance, but I can understand why it would have been cut for time, but that is why there's now 3 versions of the film. And thankfully, Arrow has presented all 3 on this release, which meant they had to do the extra work of not just scanning the negative, but also getting the other film materials and doing a high-res scan and restoration of those bits and pieces to then have 3 full versions of the film fully reconstructed. But that's why there are 3 versions of the film, and it really wasn't until the DVD that we actually got versions that were not the slightly trimmed and I think inferior US theatrical cut. So to read the section from the restoration notes, this was entirely handled by Arrow in terms of the overall work, but the actual original negative scan for Barbarian was done at Universal, since they hold the primary elements for the US release, so that means the negative is conformed to the US theatrical cut. That scan was done at 4K resolution at 16-bit, and then additional film materials like an original 35mm inner positive of the last 2 reels for the international cut, and then original negative for the extra conversation scene were also scanned at 4K 16-bit for the extended cut restorations. Then the film was restored and graded in 4K SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision, so all 3 had separate grading, and then that was done at Silver Salt Restoration in London. So to talk about the overall picture quality and presentation of this release and how it compares to the atrociously poor Universal Blu-ray, this is just a complete, jaw drop breath of fresh air. It doesn't even qualify as night and day. It just obliterates that awful Universal Blu-ray that most of us just refuse to ever upgrade to. And especially me being someone who has only been watching this film on the old, not so great DVD and also the even older Laserdisc of the US theatrical cut, this is just staggering. And what's also nice is that this is not a overzealous cleanup job. Arrow doesn't really do that, thankfully, as some others unfortunately do. So while you might occasionally see a little bit of inherent wear or a speck or two or a little bit or just an infinitesimal amount of frame movement or some shots that look a little soft or hazy or slightly blurry, this is stuff that's really inherent to the source, especially as some of the shots looking a little soft or having a different focus to them. This is all inherent to the original photography, and that combined with the some of the effects work being a bit more obvious in this transfer is entirely due to the incredible strength and the splendor of this restoration process of finally giving us a beautiful presentation of the film that is done about as best as humanly possible without going overboard in digital cleanup tools. While it would have been nice to address just the handful, I would say, in the transfer overall, I noticed like maybe 4 or 5 tiny little fleeting marks or specks. While it would have been nice to see those addressed, I would much rather have a beautiful transfer like this that just has 1 or 2 things here and there in addition to things inherent to the original photography and production and the actual element than somebody going overboard like the atrociously bad Universal Blu-ray. Again, those Universal Blu-rays were so bad that this is just a release I never thought would happen, and it's absolutely astounding that it exists and you can literally hold it in your hands and watch it. In terms of the HDR presentation, the Dolby Vision is very tastefully done and really goes hand in hand with the overall new 4K transfer to just make it look absolutely astounding. And frequently you'll feel as if you're running a print of the film in your house. That's the level of astonishing quality that you get in the picture transfer. Unfortunately, that's not to say that it is 100% perfect, because there is one tiny little moment that feels like it is definitely just a flaw or a goof. It's a very blink and you miss it thing, but some fans have noticed it and it's been discussed in forums, and I did check against all my other copies just to make sure. But for just a fleeting second at the hour and 29-minute mark or so, just before the start of the sequence in the orgy chamber that leads into the big battle inside said chamber, as Subutai goes up to look over into the orgy chamber, we go from the very red-looking room. There's suddenly a shift to a different color timing, and it's something that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It is a blink and you miss it thing. Most people don't seem to notice this when it happens, but it is something that happens only in this new Arrow Master, and does seem to be just a very, very, very tiny goof in the actual color timing by having it just suddenly shift as the shot changes. Again, it's a split second, and so most people don't even notice it, but I have included here just me trying to record my television screen so you can get an idea of what this is and how small it is, but it is there. So once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. But unfortunately, that is the one tiny little flaw that is in this otherwise stupendous transfer, which is beautifully encoded and made. And so it's not a gigantic red flag for me, and I'm able to live with it. I wish it wasn't there, but it is something that is in this Arrow 4K Master, and it is the only thing in the Picture Master that I can at all have any complaints about, because otherwise the video presentation, the overall picture quality, the Dolby Vision HDR, also the HDR10 is excellent. I checked that as well. It's just not as nuanced as the Dolby Vision, of course. The disc encoding, everything about this, other than that one tiny little flaw, is stupendous, and this disc is still worth its weight in gold. And also getting this after how the film has been treated by Universal in the past, and that god-awful, terrible piece of junk Blu-ray from that awful HD master. I mean, I never thought this would happen. I simply never thought we would see something of this level of quality and attention to detail. So one tiny little flaw does not mar the whole otherwise stupendous experience. But for diehard fans of this film, you will probably notice that, or if you've seen the forum discussions, you've seen some photos and things. So again, it is there. It's unfortunate, but thankfully it is extraordinarily minor and is over in a split second. So again, it's a blink and you miss it thing, and most people won't notice it at all. Now, in terms of audio, the film thankfully has its original mono mix, as it should, but we also have a brand new Atmos remix that seems to have been derived from the Universal 5.1 remix done for the past home video releases. So to read the transfer blurb, the original mono track was remastered at Bad Princess Productions in London. The Atmos mixes were produced at Deluxe Audio in London, partly adapting a legacy 5.1 home video remix by Universal. Now, to briefly discuss the remix, because as most people are probably already aware, I'm an audio purist. I don't even like the concept of remixes, and I can't stand them, so I have no use for them. But at least this is basically reworking the prior Universal home video 5.1 remix that basically tries to expand the sound field of the original mono mix. The score is now in stereo, as it should have always been. The film should have gotten a Dolby stereo mix, but unfortunately the producers cheaped out on the audio. But also, I never thought the 5.1 remix was all that great or as effective as the admittedly more limited mono mix. I think the sound field is opened up for sure, but also you get some effects moved around, and it just never sounded all that great. And then this has been used as the basis for the new Atmos remix, which basically expands the sound field of the 5.1 remix even further and basically fine-tunes it a little bit and will give you an ability to hear the film in your Atmos-equipped home theater and use all of your additional speakers. But again, I think this is just basically polishing a remix that already was not all that great. And again, I'm really against the concept of remixes to begin with. Also, there are some new effects mixed in here and there, which I can't stand. And ideally, the film would have gotten a Dolby Stereo mix for the 1982 release, which would have been boisterous and beautifully made, and that could have been used to make a 5.1 up mix with no problem. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So really, to experience the film properly, you do just have to stick with the original mono mix. But for those who insist on having multi-channel at all costs, at least this new Atmos track is a tasteful updating of the original Universal 5.1 home remix. Now, the mono is, of course, I think the all-important track here. It is, of course, known for being a more limited mono track. This is not even as impressive an audio mix as other 1982 films, obviously, so it will always have that sort of hemmed-in quality baked into it. But the actual mono mix itself is solidly done, and while this, unfortunately, sort of limits the effectiveness, or I should say the immediate impact of Basil Polidoros' amazing score, it's still well mixed, and overall you quickly get used to how this is just a single channel mono mix done for a bigger than life 1982 Sword and Sorcery classic. The actual mix here is, at least in terms of the fidelity and presentation, it is losslessly encoded. It has been done from a new transfer, as I read, but it has been given a little bit of processing here and there, which is unfortunate. In comparison to past releases, it is thankfully better than what we had on the DVD, which had some processing that was a bit overzealous, and that never sounded all that great. It sounded a little bit muffled, actually. But that's how you actually got the original mono for the extended cuts of the film, was on that DVD. And in fact, the Blu-ray didn't even have the original mono mix because studios seem to despise original audio for some unknown stupid reason. But here we have a new transfer of the original mono, which sounds very good on its own. Again, much better than the processed version on the DVD, and it's for all three cuts of the film. But when you do compare it to the original Universal Laserdisc of the US theatrical cut, this is pretty much untouched, and it does sound better. This is unfortunately a case where I think you have a really stupendous release, but for whatever reason, people feel the need to apply noise reduction and audio processing to vintage audio, sometimes where it's not really needed, or at least a bit much. You can actually, if you listen closely or you compare them directly, you can tell the points at which the new mono transfer and master on the Arrow release has had extra noise reduction applied, which again is really unnecessary. Otherwise, this is a fine sounding version of the mono mix, and again, far better than the DVD, which was your only other option. But of course, the old Laserdisc with, I think, the better sounding, really untouched audio is only the US theatrical cut. So you will have to use the Arrow release for the other cuts, I think the superior cuts of the film with the additional footage that had the original mono restored for those sections as well, so you could have all three cuts seamlessly branched. So while some have complained or criticized the release for the very slight color timing issue in just a split second, for me the big issue, really the only gigantic issue, is that unfortunately the mono track has had some processing work applied to it, which it's really not necessary. Again, if you have the US letterbox Laserdisc from Universal and you're able to play the digital PCM track and compare the two directly, I think it's pretty obvious that if they had just taken this and not done the additional work, it would have been perfectly fine. So at least it's still the original audio on this release, and it's a new transfer, and it sounds good, but it can sound better, actually, and it actually did on the old Laserdisc. But again, this is a standard Universal Laserdisc from the early 1990s, and it's only the US theatrical cut. So if you are at all able to make your own custom versions and you want the best audio for the film, you do need to capture the US Laserdisc and sync it to the new Arrow master. But of course, you then have to deal with switching back to the other Arrow audio source for the extended cut scenes for the other two versions of the film. Now, in terms of packaging and artwork, this release did come bundled with the second film in this Chronicles set that I'm reviewing, but also came in a deluxe slip-boxed version if you just wanted the individual films. But the individual cases for the films in the set, or the individual sets, all use the unbelievably gorgeous, iconic original artwork, and nicely with the traditional Arrow logos. Then we have two discs with the UHD for disc 1, and then disc 2 for the supplements is a Blu-ray disc. Arrow does not do dual format releases usually, so if you want a version of the film on Blu-ray, that will be separate and not include the UHD, and of course vice versa. The limited edition also includes beautiful, nicely printed reproductions of original lobby cards, which also very nicely have the gorgeous poster on the reverse. So again, these are just beautifully done, and they're also on a nice thicker cardstock, so they have a premium feel to them. So if studios or labels are going to do printed materials, they need to be well done and beautifully executed like these are. Then, of course, the back cover has the extensive list of supplements, which are, again, mostly on the second Blu-ray disc. So to go over the supplements, again, on disc 1, we have the UHD with the 3 versions of the feature, but then also we have 2 commentaries. The first is the vintage one by John Milius and Arnold Schwarzenegger that was done for the DVD. It's a fun listen, but they're basically having a conversation with themselves, but it's still really enjoyable to listen to, so I'm glad it was ported over here. But we also have a brand new commentary by Paul M. Salmon, who is one of the great names in terms of fantasy and science fiction film historians. He is definitely the one-man walking encyclopedia of Blade Runner knowledge, of course, but also was there on the set of the Conan films and wrote articles for the original additional press releases and promotions for the film. So he had direct firsthand experience with the actual production, the cast and crew, and was literally there. So he is the perfect choice to do commentaries for both films on this set. And his tracks really, I think, are, while these are still loaded with supplements, I think his commentary tracks are the absolute highlight of the supplemental features, and alone make the purchase worthwhile if you're a fan of these films. And then beautifully, we get a new presentation of the actual isolated score for the film. So you get to actually experience Basil Polidoros' incredible, iconic music for Conan the Barbarian in an isolated music track. And this is, of course, for the extended cut, because that way you actually get the full isolated score track as opposed to it being the shorter US theatrical cut. Now, the Blu-ray houses the rest of all the supplements, and these are a mixture of legacy extras and brand new extras produced by Arrow. So all of the legacy extras are mostly from the old Universal DVDs. So if they are from that era, they are, of course, standard def and being upscaled. So it looks about the same quality-wise. Thankfully, they're nicely encoded here. If they were slightly newer ones done for the Blu-ray releases, they will be obviously in slightly better quality, but the newly produced extras in terms of what Arrow produced will, of course, be brand new and modern and look the best. What's interesting to note, though, about the Arrow extras is that when they have clips of the film, it looks to be from a earlier master, or at least one that didn't have all of their cleanup applied yet, because if you look closely, you'll note that you'll see extra specks and bits of damage and things, and still clips that look very good, but it's kind of fun to see when you get to sort of spot, oh, this is an earlier version of the master, so you can see the basically the work that was done. And I don't know, I kind of think it's fun seeing that, and having clips from the film in between talking heads be sort of rougher or slightly rawer looking. So that was just a fun note. So the extras on disc 2 include Conan Unchained, the making of Conan, which is the documentary from the DVD. It's the best sort of one-stop for the history and the making of the first Conan film. Then we have Designing Conan, which is a new Arrow piece with production artist William Stout, who talks extensively about Ron Cobb and his incredible production design. Then we have Costuming Conan, which is another new interview with the costume designer John Bloomfield, which is, again, chock full of first-hand anecdotes about the actual experience of producing and making Conan on location in Spain, but also for Dino De Laurentiis and dealing with all of the incredible personalities involved. Then we have another new piece entitled Barbaric Effects, which is with special effects crew members Colin Arthur and Ron Hone. And what's great is that they talk in particular about the nature of the effects work and how they had to generate all the shots using various what are now termed old-fashioned techniques well before the dawn of the digital effects era. Then we have an interview entitled Young Conan, which is with the actor George Sanz, who of course played the boy Conan in the opening of the film. We have another actor interview with Jack Taylor entitled Conan and the Priest, which is a fun bit with the actor who plays the priest who is waylaid by Conan and of course loses his clothes and uniform as well. Then we get an interview entitled Crafting Conan's Magic, which is with the visual effects crew members Peter Curran and Catherine Keene. They talk in particular about how the effects sequences were generated and designed and what techniques they had to use, which is really helpful and fascinating because all of this was done well before the dawn of digital effects, and they blended a different variety of techniques in order to actually create and achieve the shots needed for the different sequences. And it's fascinating getting greater background about how these different techniques were blended together to create finished materials. Then we get Barbarians and Northmen, which is a new interview with Robert Eggers talking specifically about how much he loves Conan the Barbarian, the film, and how it was a huge influence on his film, The Northman, which all you had to do was see the trailer and you could very clearly tell it was very heavily drawing on the Conan the Barbarian film. Then we get a really great historian piece in Behind the Barbarian, which is with John Walsh, who has authored a book I'd really like to get and read, Conan the Barbarian, The Official History of the Film. Then we get A Line in the Sand, which is a new interview with Alfio Leotta, author of The Cinema of John Milius. This in particular is looking at Conan within the context of Milius's overall cinematic body of work and his overall core themes. So this one is really important, and this is yet another book I'd like to get and read. Then we get a archival piece from past releases entitled Conan the Rise of a Fantasy Legend, which is talking about the Robert E. Howard stories and the Marvel Comics version of the character. Then we get another archival piece entitled Art of Steel, A Sword Makers and Masters, which is basically going through the making of extremely detailed replicas of the swords and weaponry seen in the film. We get the incredible From the Vault pieces of old interviews done on the set with the cast and crew, and while these are in lower quality, it's just amazing to get these nice little fly-on-the-wall pieces in terms of people actually talking at the time while during the production of the film. Then we get a whole host of videos entitled A Tribute to Basil Polidorus, talking about his incredible career as a film composer, remembrances from family and friends, his Conan score, and also very touchingly preparations for a sort of honorary event where he was invited to do a live performance of the score along with the film, and you actually get to have that concert performance even in 5.1 surround in terms of the actual audio mixing of the live performance. So this is just a really special whole section of the supplements on this release that's especially great for fans of the composer's work, but also definitely give you a sense of not only his style as a composer, but also how he was as a genuinely great human being. So this is definitely, I think, the most touching and emotionally rewarding of the already stuffed amount of supplements on this release. And we also have a presentation of a electronic press kit from 1982 that unfortunately is in low quality and does have watermarks baked in, but again, this is such a rare piece of getting much more long form, or at least slightly more longer form, fly on the wall direct interviews with people during the production. And I don't know about you, but getting the chance to see vintage EPKs is not always something that you get a chance to because most don't survive. And even getting it in low, crummy quality with baked-in watermarks, it's still fascinating to have. So I'm very happy that Arrow was able to source this and chose to include it. Then we have essentially a highlight reel of outtakes and a deleted scene. These are the same as what was on the original DVD. So these are, of course, standard def and a bit noisy, but upscaled. And basically they look and sound exactly the same as they did on the DVD release. We also get a split screen of the sort of ghosts on Conan's deathbed sequence of showing the live photography and then the overall effects work and then the final composite that we see in the film. This is another piece done for past releases, so it's basically upscaled standard def. Then we have the archive section, which is also from the DVD. It's a gallery of photos and production images, so at least that has been ported over, but again, it's just ported over from the DVD release. Then we get a quite fun bit entitled Conan the Musical, which is a short, goofy video, basically transforming the events of the film into musical form with Conan singing his story. It's a really fun bit. You can see it on YouTube and other places online, but I just really loved its inclusion here. I hadn't actually seen it before, and it is really funny, so that was a nice touch to include it. Then we have the US international teaser and overall theatrical trailers for the film. Unfortunately, these are all much older, quite low quality sources that are standard def upscales, so unfortunately there has not been a new modern high-res scan of any vintage trailers, but at least we do have all of them present here, and they are watchable and a good representation of the film's original marketing campaign. But I always wish that trailers would get more love and would see more new transfers, but at least Arrow was kind enough to put all of them on this release. And then we conclude with a pretty extensive image gallery for this release, which basically makes up for the older DVD gallery being much more low-res. We do have a modern image gallery with some nice high-res images as well. And not to be outdone, we also have a lovely fold-out poster reproduction of the original one-sheet. This is done in the same sort of style as Arrow's deluxe hard case sets. So it's obviously smaller than the original 27 by 40, but it's on a nice sort of thicker paper stock, and it's got nice printing to it, so it's very frameable and a nice display piece, but of course it is folded to fit in the box. But nicely on the reverse, we have the iconic moment of Arnold doing the training with the sword as he's recuperating from his near-death experiences, as we see in the film. So this is another iconic image that is nicely reproduced here, and of course very much a nice frameable display piece. And now we turn to the film's one and only sequel, Conan the Destroyer, released in 1984. And this is, I think, absolutely without question, one of the great cinematic examples of getting to a series of films and getting to the second film or a sequel and going, what happened? It's no secret that Conan the Destroyer never reaches the cinematic heights of Conan the Barbarian, and of course John Milius was pretty much not at all involved in any of the sequel ideas because he had butted heads so much with Dino De Laurentiis, and the overall approach was altered due to the essentially the critical backlash and overall reception of the original film being deemed far too violent and too dark in tone, which of course is kind of silly when you think about saying that about a film that's a Conan the Barbarian film. You know, that kind of goes hand in hand with it, and also that's not examining the fact that all of the violence was dramatically motivated and not overzealous, and also had dramatic weight and was part of the story that was being told, exactly as the violence was in Robert E. Howard's original stories. So unfortunately, Conan the Destroyer is not only the lesser film, it is just a terribly flat film that is... you can't get around that it is a weak film in terms of its story is very simplistic. Basically, it's trying to be more of a throwback adventure fantasy film that could also be shown to audiences of children. So it's more of an all ages type film. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it doesn't go well at all with what John Milius had strove so hard for and what the team had achieved in making Conan the Barbarian, cinematic magic in a way. They made a legitimate work of art. It wasn't necessarily Robert E. Howard's Conan, but it represented a lot of what Robert E. Howard put into his stories and what made them so iconic. It focused and crystallized a lot of different ideas and took risks and made bold choices, and it is a film that should be studied forever, and a film that you marvel at, and a film that nobody would ever get made again today. It's a film to admire. Conan the Destroyer is none of those, but it's also not out and out completely bad or terrible. You can tell what the production was going for, and you could tell they were trying for a different audience and trying for a lighter rating, and also upping the humor and adjusting the tone to where it no longer even really resembles the first film. I think it was an absolute mistake to do any of this, but I can understand why it was done. What I don't understand is why they took the Conan 2 script as it started out by Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, who came from the Marvel Conan comics, why they took that and basically watered it down so much and threw out so much of that script that basically Conan the Destroyer, the film that we have and was written in terms of the screenplay credit by Stanley Mann, why they basically gave us just a supremely watered down, oversimplified version of the basic core story idea of the Thomas and Conway Conan 2 script. Because now that I've finally gotten to read that original script of theirs, it manages to do the slightly lighter tone, but also at least be in somewhat keeping with the original Conan the Barbarian film, and would have made a solid, important, successful and actually fulfilling sequel to that film. It's not exactly the Milius style and what Milius would have done with a Conan sequel that he planned to do with Schwarzenegger, but it worked, and it's a good script, and it feels at least like Howard's Conan as well. So frankly, we got robbed. That's the actual film Conan the Destroyer. While it does have its fans, which is understandable because a lot of people grew up on this film, it is the definition of a cinematic disappointment compared to the artistic heights of the first film. It doesn't even belong in the same grouping. But it is the one and only sequel that De Laurentiis made and saw the return of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and some of the other cast and crew members, particularly Basil Polidorus, returned to produce a new score and use his iconic Conan theme once again. So there are positives, and the cast is relatively well chosen, although, again, the attempt to gear the film more towards a lighter rating and a child audience, unfortunately, I think, makes the actual tone change and the direction the final screenplay goes. It not only had watered down the original source screenplay for Conan 2, but watered it down even further. And there was also additional ADR done for a lot of the dialogue, which altered the actual performances of certain characters, which I think sort of unfortunately has the effect of dumbing down the film even more. But it is just such a simplistic story that could have been told in 90 minutes. It feels like a B film. It's definitely one of those films that by the time you finish it and you realize that the basic story we've been following of Conan having to escort a princess around as she fulfills parts of an ancient ritual or prophecy, and of course the queen who sends them on this quest has evil motives. Again, none of this is hard to figure out. Basically, when you realize that in the opening of the film, you basically have the whole story, and there are no real surprises outside of some of the set pieces. And that basic through line in terms of the narrative is all you've got. You get to the end of this film and you go, that's it? That's really it? And that's not aided by the fact that the climax of the film was very watered down itself. And the film basically builds to Conan fighting against a single monstrous creature that also is not all that impressive. It really leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Again, while it's not entirely without merit, and it does have elements that at least win you over and some really important names associated with it, the best comparison I think one could make is that Conan the Destroyer is like getting a soda and then after the first sip realizing that it's completely flat. It's such an incredible shame that this film turned out that way. However, it still manages to have some of the spirit and energy of a period adventure film, particularly of the 1950s and 60s. And I think this is entirely due to the choice of director, which was inspired for what they were trying to do. And I think this is why the film has any major merits to it. And that's because it was directed by the great Richard Fleischer, who directed the iconic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for Disney. So he was a perfect choice for this type of film. But that also means that the pace is more suited to a film of that era because that was the sort of style they were kind of going for, and they hired the greatest name for making those films. So the film actually has a more sedate pace in a way, and it's structured and feels more like a 1950s or 60s fantasy adventure film that was also geared towards a children's market. So it all makes sense on paper, and Fleischer manages to direct the performances and instill the overall experience with enough of that old-fashioned fantasy adventure spark that the film never really grates or gets fully on the nerves. So it remains a film that you can watch and passably enjoy as long as you're not thinking about how this is totally not Robert E. Howard's Conan and how this is totally doing a disservice to the amazing first film that John Milius and everyone else made. So if you look at it for its own merits, it's at least solid, because it is very, very expertly made in terms of its overall production and direction. It's unbelievably focused and on point. So it is a handsomely made film. It was also shot in Mexico and utilized the Mexican studios and production teams to the greatest of their abilities. So there are some really nice sets and also some really nice sequences, but it does always feel like a pale imitation of the original film. However, I think the major standout of the second film and what this Arrow release really highlights, the absolute best part of Conan the Destroyer, is that it was shot by the legendary Jack Cardiff, who was a longtime friend and partner of Richard Fleischer in terms of him being the cinematographer for Fleischer directing many times before and on similar films. So when you're watching this film, the visuals you're seeing are far beyond what this very simple, watered-down story deserves. The visuals are what make the film really work, and they are the absolute highlight. And that's because you have an absolute master of his craft, one of the greatest cinematographers who ever lived, and in particular, one of the absolute masters of three-strip Technicolor, and the primary photographer for all the masterpieces of the Archers, shooting Conan the Destroyer. So, in some ways, people might obviously say that's definitely an example of overkill, but Cardiff was an extreme professional who was doing a lot of genre films around this time, and of course, the next year would shoot Rambo First Blood Part 2, which is why that film is so visually striking, just like Destroyer. So the images, the visuals, the photography, the color, the actual compositions of the image are just incredible. So that is the highlight of Conan the Destroyer. The absolute best thing about the film is Jack Cardiff's photography, which has even shined on older, not so good standard definition video masters. You could just tell how splendid this film looked, even though it didn't have anywhere near the intricate production design of the first film. So I do think there are things to appreciate in Conan the Destroyer, but it is helpful to look at it on its own. You just have to make sure you're not constantly comparing it to Conan the Barbarian, because it always comes up short. The only elements that it has that I think could be considered superior are the incredible photography of Jack Cardiff being so technically polished and at the absolute apex of cinematography, because it's one of the masters doing it. It means that you don't have some of the rough around the edges quality of the photography of the first film. And then also Arnold's performance as Conan, I think, is obviously a bit more relaxed. He was a fully established film actor by this point, and they're also giving him more humorous bits to play, which he's very adept at doing. So he seems more relaxed in the role, and of course he altered his physique to appear much more muscular in this film, as that was what Richard Fleischer was really wanting to highlight visually. So, there are certain elements here that are unique and do add to the mythology of the Conan film. So it is important, and it's obviously the film that's geared much more towards children, so kids are going to gravitate to this film a lot more, but it is unbelievably inferior in terms of dramatic qualities, intellectual ideas, philosophical ideas. You don't really get any of those. And just the overall impact is so completely different to the first film that it will always be in the shadow of the Conan the Barbarian film. But it still has its moments, and it is handsomely mounted in terms of the direction, the photography, but also there's a certain degree, for sure, that it has a bit of a workman-like quality to it. There's a sense of this was made by professionals. Well, it was made by professionals, but it doesn't have the the raw beating heart that is throughout every frame of Conan the Barbarian, which I think is probably the best of all of John Milius's films. I think in ways it is the most complete work that he's made in terms of exploring the core themes you find in all of his films. So, I mean, it's an unfair comparison comparing the two films, so that's why I always say you have to look at them separately. But I think Conan the Destroyer has such a more of a business quality to it, for lack of a better term, that I actually think the spin-off Red Sonja is actually a better film. That has a terrible reputation. It certainly has a lion's share of its own problems, but it feels a bit more energetic, and it has a really nice Ennio Morricone score, and I really wish it was here in this set and that Arrow had gotten to do that film and it didn't get a terrible Studio Canal release with an atrociously bad color grading. But for all of their faults, the basically last two films of the Conan trilogy, if you count Red Sonja, which you kind of have to because it's a spin-off film, even though Schwarzenegger's playing a different character, they have their flaws, but they also have their own charms, and they're interesting to watch. But definitely, they are just not in the same universe as Conan the Barbarian. But it is important to look at these other two, and while I think Destroyer is actually the weakest of all of the De Laurentiis Conan films in terms of the three films, I think it is handsomely made, and I think the real draw is the fact that they got Richard Fleischer to direct and Jack Cardiff to photograph it. And of course, the return of Basil Polidoris, who does create a fine score and get to reuse some of his themes, but even he was very vocal about how it was not the same in terms of the overall production, and it didn't have the heart and the incredible risk taking, and it doesn't have the balls of Conan the Barbarian. But what film really does? No one is ever going to make a film as ballsy as Conan the Barbarian ever again, though I know myself and many others would certainly like to. Now, to talk about the overall picture quality, first I'll read the little blurb from the restoration note. For Destroyer, the original 35mm camera negative was scanned in 4K resolution at 16-bit at NBC Universal. Then the film was restored and graded in 4K SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision by Silver Salt in London. Now, in terms of the overall picture quality, this is just like Conan the Barbarian. This is a stunning looking transfer, and frankly, in ways, it's even more stunning because it's fully unlocking the just what Jack Cardiff did in terms of the photography. But this is a film that I have even marveled at watching the DVD on a CRT television. Even old standard def transfers can't mask the beauty of Cardiff's work, but this is just a stunning looking transfer. But of course, it is based on similar elements, so while they're using the original negative and the quality is like we've never seen before, you do still have a little bit of fluctuation in terms of materials. There are one or two spots that look a little bit lower in quality, but that seems inherent to the source, and that was kind of like that even on the old DVD. So that's to be expected. But like Barbarian, there were one or two tiny little source defects that I noticed sort of fleetingly. There was one tiny little hair in the center of one frame edge, which may be inherent to the source. And then there were just a couple little specks of dirt and things here and there, just incredibly fleeting ones. But again, as I mentioned on Barbarian, I like to note these whenever I see them, and I would much rather have something like this where it's done beautifully and very hands-off without going overzealously into cleanup territory, because then you get things like the atrocious Universal HD master and Blu-ray of Conan the Destroyer, which had, DNR out the wazoo and grain removal and just looked terrible. Again, this is a film that had such a poor Blu-ray that I just stuck with the old Universal DVD, and that's not even anamorphic, so I just watched that DVD on a CRT whenever I rewatched Destroyer before this Arrow release was done. And again, even there, I could marvel over Cardiff's photography, but seeing it here fully unleashed in a beautiful 4K scan of an original negative with Dolby Vision HDR that really allows the nuances to come to the fore. So the overall color nuances, the shadow detail, the nuances of the lighting are such that you've never seen before. So if you're like me and you're not really a big fan of Conan the Destroyer and you feel it's a definite downturn after seeing the great first film all over again, seeing this beautiful, breathtaking transfer on this UHD with Dolby Vision, fully unleashing Jack Cardiff's amazing photography, that really sweetens the deal. It makes it an incredible experience, even if you're otherwise kind of groaning, why did they fire Melius? Why did they throw out the original Conan 2 script? Why did they water this down so much? But it also will make fans of the film absolutely delighted because it's never looked this stupendous before. Again, you get the impression in a lot of moments that you're somehow running a perfect print of the film that was never sent out in your house. It is just stunning to see, and the disc encoding is superb, just like the disc for Barbarian, but now you don't have other versions of the film branched on, so the actual encoding in terms of the bit rate reaches even higher numbers. So on both discs, the overall encoding is exceptional and featuring very high bit rates, but here on Destroyer, you see moments where we're well into the range of 120 megabits per second at times, or well over 100 megabits per second, which is just fantastic to see, and that's what all UHDs should be doing when they hit their highest moments. So of course, anytime I see a fantastic encoding job and see numbers like that when I'm just scrubbing through, that gives me hope about disc encoding. Of course, this is being handled by the wizards at Fidelity and Motion, so we've come to expect that from them. So this has my absolute seal of approval in terms of having phenomenal disc encoding on both films. Now, in terms of the audio, to read the blurb about the transfer, the original mono track for Destroyer was remastered by, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, Porstein Gislason. Again, my apologies if I butchered the name. I'm terrible with pronunciations. The Atmos remix was produced using the original mono dialogue, music, and effects stem elements at Deluxe Audio in London. So to talk about the remix first, since I have no use for them, I did watch through the film and sample it with the remix as well, as I always check every remix track, because even though I hate the concept of audio remixes, I still try to review them properly. This, of course, is an Atmos mix done from scratch from the original elements in terms of the original stems, so they had the ability to generate a fully cohesive, brand new remix without being stuck using a older 5.1 existing remix as Barbarian did, and also they've got the original stems, so they can actually remix from scratch, and I don't know if Barbarian has the original stems or all that exists, or the conformed to the final mono mix elements. So this remix is much less constrained than the Atmos remix of the first film because they had all the original stem elements. It expands the sound field, obviously, from the original mono. And if you absolutely insist on a 1984 fantasy adventure film having multi-channel audio, well, this is at least well done. I don't think it fits the film intrinsically for 1984, and I do think the mono mix is still the better option. But if you like filling your home theater and insist on a multi-channel option, this is well done because they were able to remix from the original stems directly. Now, in terms of the mono mix, that is presented in lossless quality here and is, of course, a new transfer and remastering. Now, I only have the DVD for Destroyer, which has the mono, and that didn't sound all that great. Neither did the mono for Barbarian on the DVD. But unfortunately, there was never a letterbox laserdisc or a fancy older release in terms of video iterations. So I don't have the old pan and scan laserdisc of Destroyer, which only had an analog track, nor do I have the VHS. Eventually, it did get a laserdisc with a digital PCM track, but that was only in Japan, and that was still pan and scanned, and that release is kind of uncommon and, of course, rather pricey. So eventually, I'd like to get one of those and do a comparison with this release and the DVD. But this is at least a healthy, solid-sounding version of the mono mix. There are are some moments where the dialogue sounds a little harsh, but I think that is kind of intrinsic to the overall elements. If you study sound mixes, you can obviously tell that some characters have a heavy ADR, and so that causes differences and fluctuations in the overall noise floor of the track, and that's just inherent to the actual mix itself. Now, in terms of the overall mono presentation for Destroyer here on this UHD, it is of course a brand new transfer of original elements, so when you compare it to the only other major source that I have for the original mix, the original Universal DVD, it is clearer as it is a new transfer, but it does seem like there has been some noise reduction applied. So when I was comparing the two directly and going back and forth time and time again, it seemed clearly obvious that it was probably the same element that was being transferred. And while the new track has greater clarity, it's also a bit compromised, especially in the high end. It makes the track sound a little bit harsher than what the DVD did, but also the DVD mono at times could feel a little bit muffled, but it does have at least a bit more of the high end intact, so it seems. So it's kind of a trade-off between the two. And of course, it is a limited mono mix because once again, the De Laurentiis group did not spring for a Dolby stereo track, and that really does hold back the sonic palette of the two Conan films. But Destroyer is a more boisterous mono than the mono track of Barbarian was. But I definitely think while it's great we finally got a new transfer of the mono mix and there is a good sounding version of it at least on the disc, I do think it could be better if it had been left entirely alone. And so I would say it's basically a sort of toss up between which mono track you prefer, the one on the DVD or the one on the new Arrow UHD. It is entirely possible that a past release from before the DVD could have a better mono track as Barbarian did. I just don't have access to any of those at the present, and really I'd like to track down that Japanese Laserdisc reissue that added a digital PCM mono track. And of course that'll definitely be the best iteration in terms of past releases and in the highest quality, but I would like to at least try and check that at some point, or the original VHS and US Laserdisc releases to see if it's any better than the Universal DVD mono, which is the situation for Barbarian. I just only have the Laserdisc for Barbarian because we didn't get a spiffy one for Destroyer here, and the pan and scan one is a bit elusive and kind of pricey at times, so I'd just like to compare to at least some past version in the near future, just to see if it's any better than the Universal DVD mono. But again, at least we do have the original mono mix on the Arrow UHD. It sounds good, but I do think it could sound just a little bit better had it been basically left alone more. But at least this UHD does have a solid new mastering of the original mono mix, let alone it actually has the original mono mix, which the Blu-ray of course did not, because studios hate original audio because they don't realize that's, half of the original experience is having the actual original soundtrack of the film. This isn't rocket science, people. In terms of the packaging and artwork, here we have the UHD case with a version of the original iconic one-sheet poster artwork, which of course is very striking. But in an example of pure sorcery, somehow, with the incredible amount of supplements, Arrow has managed to only use one UHD disc. So this has a stupendous transfer of the film, 2 lossless audio tracks, and a plethora of supplements in addition to multiple commentaries. And this, I think, also further underlines the genius and technical wizardry of the fine folks at Fidelity and Motion, who are pretty much the best in the business in terms of disc encoding, because all of this material and a sublime transfer with a maxed out bit rate all on one disc. How they do it sometimes like this, I don't know. It's just technical physical media sorcery. We also have more beautiful lobby card reproductions on nice cardstock with lovely printing that also include a reproduction of the original poster artwork on the reverse that I have just dropped. What I really like about these is that they seem like direct transfers, so the images do retain that quality of being set photographs and stills, and so they do look distinctly different in terms of color and lighting to the same images when you see them in the film. So even that is replicated, so they legitimately feel like full-on reproductions or copies of the original lobby cards. So these are really well done reproductions, as opposed to what we see sometimes, where it's just kind of more of a thing that some labels kind of do as a tossed-off gesture. And then we look at the rear, which features all of the extensive supplements, both legacy extras and newly produced supplements by Arrow. And again, astoundingly, all of this plus the incredible feature transfer are all on the same UHD disc. So this just goes to show you that things can be properly done and all fit onto a single disc, but it takes people who really care about things like this, and of course the technical sorcerers at Fidelity in Motion. Again, I just have to note that the film clips used in the new HD pieces generated by Arrow seem to be from a different master that shows some dirt, but also is not the beautiful new Arrow restoration. So I don't know if it was just an older master that was sitting around, or a version of the Blu-ray master, or an earlier version of the Arrow master. But again, I just notice things like that and think it's interesting to note when that happens. So in terms of the supplements, we start with just a variety of commentaries that are basically a mixture of new and legacy ones. So we have a archival commentary with Richard Fleischer. So you get the director talking about the film's overall experience, what he was trying to do in making this film, and how he was basically brought on at first as a sort of hired gun, but how the film very much fit the body of his past work in terms of tone and style. So it's actually quite insightful in terms of listening to the overall track. It's not the most jam-packed with information, but it's also one of the great directors of his era who doesn't really get trumpeted about all that much, doing a feature-length commentary and also referencing all elements of his past career. So it's really worthwhile as a listen, even if you're not a big fan of the film. Then we have another archival commentary, this with the actors Olivia d'Abo and Tracy Walter. They basically recount their experiences on the film and are sort of saying it again for the first time in years. So it's your sort of standard type of actors and actresses commentary, but it's an okay enough listen. You're not going to learn anything that's particularly brand new if you've watched all the other supplements, but it's definitely worth a listen if you're going through the entirety of the supplements, and it's really nice that Arrow has made sure to bring over all of the legacy commentaries. Because we also have a third archival commentary, this with the great team of Kim Newman and Stephen Jones, but also with the great Sarah Douglas, who talks about her experiences on the film, and they basically just have a running conversation about the film. It's a fun listen, it's a good listen, and it's a good conversation, but the whole time I'm kind of sitting there wishing that they had just let Newman and Jones loose to go to town on Conan the Destroyer and also talk about all its deficiencies. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it's still a nice commentary to listen to. But again, it's much more of a conversation between the three and a sort of career interview as well. So it's not very much specifically about Destroyer, except in certain moments. But of course, that's all made up for because the fourth commentary is the new one for this release, and another track by the great Paul M. Salmon, who was also on the set of Conan the Destroyer and talks at length about the incredible difference between the two films, and also how different the actual set experience was on each film, and how it was in a different country and a couple years down the road, and no sign of anything that Milius and company had put into the first film. So he is the perfect person and the ultimate expert to talk about this particular film and this aspect of its production that really resulted in the film that we all sort of pick apart or analyze to death. So it's just as good as his commentary on the first film, and really it's kind of like the second part because they flow into one another, and if you listen to one of his commentaries, you want to immediately listen to the other one. Then for the rest of the extras, we again beautifully have a newly assembled complete isolated score of Polydorus's lovely work here in isolated stereo. So thankfully both of his scores for the Conan films are presented in isolated track presentations, so you can actually view the film and get that sort of concert experience in a way that you get nowadays with occasional tours of seeing films projected with orchestras performing the scores. We get a new Arrow thorough interview entitled Casting the Destroyer, which is with the original casting director Joanna Ray, who talks at length about not only the casting choices, but also the unique ones, the sort of out there choices, and also some of the switch ups that resulted from certain actors leaving the production. So it's actually quite insightful because one of the film's strengths is definitely that the cast is quite varied and there are some really notable choices that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Most striking, of course, would be casting Grace Jones in the film, and it was her appearance here that most obviously led to her being cast in A View to a Kill the next year. Then we get a piece entitled Cut from a Different Cloth, which is another interview with a costume designer John Bloomfield, who's one of the number of crew members who worked on both of the Conan films. So there was at least some cross-pollination between the two. We get another new interview entitled Dune and the Destroyer, which is with the art director Kevin Phipps, who talks in particular about how De Laurentiis was producing both Conan the Destroyer and the David Lynch version of Dune at the same time, using a lot of the same sets. So basically, you had a lot of cross-pollination between those two productions in terms of materials and, of course, cast and crew members as well. Then for me, as a lifelong James Bond fanatic, the most notable of the new interviews is Sword, Sorcery, and Stunts, which is with the legendary stunt coordinator and second unit director Vic Armstrong, who's one of the greatest stuntmen of all time. And he was brought on to coordinate the film, and I think has not only a lot of great insights, but I think you can tell the action choreography, even though this is a much lighter film in tone, is beefed up in areas, and you would know that there had been a change in terms of the stunt choreography between the two films anyway, because the style's different. But as soon as you see Vic Armstrong's name in the credits, it suddenly makes sense why, even though it's a lighter film in tone, that the actual stunt choreography is beefed up and much more. Well, like with Fleischer and Cardiff being brought on, it could be described as having a fully professional quality to it throughout, and that's befitting that they had one of the all-time great stuntmen and second unit directors. But of course, Armstrong worked most notably in a lot of the James Bond films and the Indiana Jones films, so Conan the Destroyer fit quite nicely within his wheelhouse. So he has a lot of great insights, and it's a nice extended interview, so I could watch Vic Armstrong talk about films forever because it's Vic Armstrong talking about stunting and stunt coordinating and, of course, second unit directing as well. So he talks about his experiences on the film and working for the De Laurentiis company. We get another interview with John Walsh, who wrote the official history of Conan the Barbarian book. He talks here specifically about Conan the Destroyer and how it has its own unique style and contrasts very heavily with the first film. So this is a really important, nice critical piece talking about the film and also trying to highlight the positives that it does have. Then we have an archival featurette entitled Conan the Making of a Comic Book Legend, which is an interview with the original writers Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, who came again from the Marvel Comics Conan, and they do talk some about their original story concept and their original script and then their thoughts on the final film, but one wishes you could just hear them talk completely off the cuff and let loose about how they feel about the film. But at least we have some representation from the original writers here, and their original script, I think, was eventually adapted into comic book forms. You can look at it that way, but also a draft of their script is floating around online, which you can read as a PDF, and I highly recommend it because it will basically explain why we got the story in the film we did and why it feels so simplistic. Like, there's a lot of stuff missing because like at least 70 to 90% of their storyline was just jettisoned or dialed down or just completely eradicated for seemingly no reason other than to just dumb it down and get a lighter toned rating, which is just a shame. Again, we got robbed, is the feeling you get when you read their script. But it's important to have their voice on here in the supplements because, again, their script basically, at least in some forms, is still there in the final film. The core of their story is there and their main plot is still there, but everything else is gone. Then we get an archival interview with Basil Polidorus entitled Composing the Conan Saga, so it's just great to have more of the composer's incredible insight, even though he, like the rest of us, thought the sequel was just not a match for the original at all. He still created a fine, lovely score for it. And then we close out with a lovely image gallery and 2 original trailers. Thankfully, the first trailer is actually in HD and it's in the original scope ratio, so it looks pretty solid and it's nice to see an HD trailer. The second is not HD, so it's an SD upscale, but it looks solid, but interestingly, it seems to be more in the 1.66 to 1 ratio, so it seems to be an old European trailer, but it's at least nice to have another trailer to look at the film's marketing campaign in a different light. And we also have another lovely poster fold-out replica, this of the nice Destroyer one-sheet artwork on nice thicker stock with nice printing, so it's very frameable as a nice display piece. And on the reverse, we have another iconic still of Arnold in full battle pose with all muscles exposed, so this is another nicely reproduced, very frameable display image. Now let's talk about the actual limited edition Conan Chronicles box set packaging and art. So this is the box set for the 2 films. It features the iconic pose of Arnold from the Destroyer poster on what at first seems like a simplistic red background of like crimson red skies and clouds. But when you actually get it in your hands, and of course you remove the nice J card, it has a really nice reflective high gloss finish on Arnold and also on the title of the box and the titles of the films. And there's a nice sort of otherwise smooth finish quality on the rest of this with some embossing on the reflective parts. So it's actually quite nice and has a premium feel to it. It's otherwise the nice hard case box design we see from boutique labels and Arrow in particular. The spine has the custom title, and this also has the nice reflective embossing on it too. The rear, of course, is plain because the J card normally goes here with the full list of supplements. Now, some fans may prefer to get the standalone releases if you can still get a copy of the limited editions, which will, of course, feature a hard case with original poster art for each film instead of having the Chronicles box. But I have to say that I do really like this packaging. It's very simple, but also stands out nicely and is using original imagery, and it does make the box set for the 2 films together have a unique flavor to it, and you still get the original poster art on the fold-out posters and the disc artwork. Speaking of the disc art, one thing I wanted to mention, because it's very easy to miss since these are black UHD cases, the actual artwork is reversible, or at least there is an interior image. So here for Barbarian, we have a lovely shot of Arnold looking into the sun. And then here on Destroyer, we have the full main cast shot. And then nicely, the spines have the original title font as well, and they slot very nicely into the box. And then last but certainly not least is the box exclusive book, which is over 100 pages in length and done to the usual Arrow high quality standard. Now, the standalone releases with the limited edition books do have the same contents, but they're basically split into the 2 different books. But essentially, if you get the Chronicles box set, you have the full page count, but in one single volume. So this, of course, has the artwork of the box itself, and this has a sort of laminated quality to it. So it does feel quite nice, and it feels nice in the hand, but it's different to your traditional booklet that you see in a lot of sets that just have this sort of flat matte finish. So that was an interesting touch, I thought. The spine has the matching font and box set title. Inside, we find the usual beautiful imagery mixed in with both new and old critical pieces. What's great about this is we get a variety of voices, both new and old. So we have a nice piece on the Conan films by Walter Chaw, and then we also have a new piece by John Walsh entitled King Conan, which talks about not only the Conan films, but in particular the other attempts to do the character, and also especially details the attempts of John Milius to return to the world of Conan and make at least another, if not a series of films, or just one final film with Arnold Schwarzenegger as King Conan, and versions of that script do float around and make for fascinating reading. So that's really fantastic. We get some analysis of that project in this book. But the bulk of the book is taken up by the vintage pieces done by Paul M. Salmon, recounting his experiences on the sets of both Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer. So these have been reproduced in their entirety and give you not only a sense of the production, but also the day-to-day aspects of the production, but also all the approaches and attitudes of everybody involved. And you get to contrast with his writing about his experiences on the set of Conan the Destroyer and how it was very different from the Barbarian set experience. So this is, again, that beautiful sort of you are there kind of feeling. But this is just incredibly done because it's broken up into his actual day-by-day activities and experiences and trying to get people to sit down for interviews and observing sets and also certain sequences being shot. And nicely, you have various images from the films mixed in. Then we get to the piece on Destroyer, which was published in Super Special in 1984. So this has been nicely reproduced. And these are both quite lengthy. So most of the 115, 120 pages is taken up by this full-length reprinting of Salmon's original on-set articles, which are worth their weight in gold for learning about the production of these films, because you're getting that direct connection because this was somebody's direct experiences with everybody on the actual sets during the production, and then this is being reprinted here in its entirety. So there is literally nothing better you could have in terms of booklet or book material of having not one but both of Salmon's vintage full-length pieces. And then we close out with the overall production credits, the credits for this release, the thank yous, and then the restoration notes. And then Arnold on the back saying, "You will never have to look at those terrible Blu-rays ever again." And then everything fits rather nicely back into the full Chronicles set. So that is the Conan Chronicles set from Arrow Video, the new 4K restorations on both UHD and Blu-ray formats for both Conan the Barbarian and its sequel, Conan the Destroyer, plus a wealth of both new and legacy materials in terms of extras. So you will have countless hours upon hours of new and old supplements to go through, making these absolutely comprehensive in terms of their coverage of each film respectively. Now, the limited editions are pretty much sold out, so you will have to go for the standard versions or the individual limited editions. But still, in any shape or form, these are the releases you need to have for these films in your collection. The overall workflow and restoration process that was done for these films is what they've always deserved. This was done with a great deal of care to correct the horrible wrongs of those awful old Universal Blu-rays. My only real criticisms here are that I wish the original mono presentations were a little bit more hands-off in their presentation. Particularly, I wish Barbarian's mono track had been left alone so it sounded as good as the old Laserdisc. It still sounds very good. It's rather close to the Laserdisc, but I think it just had a little bit of additional noise reduction that was unnecessary. But at least it is still a solid presentation of the original mix, and we have all three versions of the film in terms of the three different cuts, so you're able to choose what you prefer. There is also that one rather teensy but unfortunate tiny little color flaw in the Barbarian transfer, which is otherwise absolutely perfect, I think. But thankfully it is extremely minor, though one would hope that it would be acknowledged or addressed at some point. But if that doesn't happen, which it probably won't, at least it is extraordinarily fleeting and minor and only lasts for about a split second. But again, one would hope that that wasn't there in the first place. But that is, I think, minor compared to my quibble about the monomix restoration. And otherwise, I think this is just an absolutely incredible effort from Arrow. And again, this is the treatment these films have always deserved. And it really corrects a lot of terrible video wrongs that they've had in the past, particularly with Blu-rays that were so deficient and so over-processed in terms of the HD masters they were using, and not having original audio and having extreme noise reduction and grain removal and deficient color timing, and they were just ugly to look at. They were terrible, and this has been a long time coming. I never thought we would see these films get properly restored like this. So one can only take their hat off to Arrow for putting in all of this effort to bring these films back to their original luster as best as humanly possible. again, with my issues aside, this is otherwise a stellar release. This is a release everybody should pick up, or already has if they're Conan completists and diehard fans. You were all over this like I was, but it will, of course, take you some time to go through each and every one of the supplements. But there's no better time to dive back into the world of Conan than here in Sumerian September. And at least you'll never have to watch those terrible Universal Blu-rays ever again. Or if you were like me, you can finally retire some of your other video copies. But I'm definitely hanging on to my Laserdisc copy because I do think the mono track of Barbarian, even though it's the theatrical cut I don't like, is better than the mono on the Arrow release. So again, if you want the best mono for Barbarian, you do have to have the US Laserdisc. But that and the tiny color quibble aside, this is a stellar release. This is beautifully done, and something that myself and all other physical media collectors and fans of the Conan films never thought would happen, because they gotten some attention by Universal and others on home video, and none of it was all that great, and in particular the HD masters were pretty dire. So this is a complete about face in terms of the overall presentation and quality of how these films look and sound on home video. It's nearly perfect. I wish it was 100% perfect, but it's 95% there, just with my two particular criticisms aside. This is a release to pick up and cherish and have on the shelf and be able to revisit these films time and time again and go through the incredible amount of supplemental materials. So as always, I hope my babbles about films and physical media releases on Blu-ray and UHD has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you haven't picked up the Arrow releases of the Conan films yet, even if you're just looking at the standard editions, they are certainly worth every penny of the original list price, and also essential to pick up in Arrow sales. Basically, these are essential to pick up if you haven't gotten them in any form, even if you're just looking at them on the SDR Blu-rays, because the transfers were properly graded and done and mastered for Dolby Vision HDR10 and SDR, because Arrow makes sure to do all three, as you should on every film. So these are just beautifully done, and with a few criticisms aside, it's the type of treatment we just never thought the Conan films would get. And the other shame is that Arrow couldn't get access to do Red Sonja and thus have all three De Laurentiis Conan and Conan adjacent films done to the same high quality standards. So if you want to get Red Sonja, you're stuck getting the new Studio Canal UHD with an atrocious color grade. So that's probably another film I'm still just going to only revisit on DVD when I feel the urge to watch it, because this stuff happens, and unfortunately Arrow and boutique labels who really care about getting things right can't get access to do every film as much as we would wish them to be able to do so. But at least we have two beautiful presentations of both Conan films in a lovely box set or standard editions, whichever you prefer or you can get, that are still available, that belong in everyone's collection, and they are filled to the brim with both new and wonderful legacy supplements. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying incredible releases like this on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.
Do you want to watch crap video masters forever?
Cram! If you ever make me think of the terrible Blu-rays again, then to hell with you!
So did the Crusader return the UHD of King Arrow to its home on the shelf. And having a further concern, he and his non-existent companions sought adventure, capturing and syncing the Laserdisc mono track to the UHD. Many video wars and discs did the Crusader fight. Honor and fear were heaped upon his name, and in time, he became a non-existent video nerd king by his own hand. This story shall also be told.